You're now watching the Danny Mac Podcast on the BetRivers Network.
And welcome back to the Danny Mac Podcast on the BetRivers Podcast Network. I've got preseason football post-game edition today, as well as a preview to the Hall of Fame for Saturday. All the Hall of Famers were out in full force last night. Julius Peppers working the Bears sideline. Devin Hester is in Canton. It's going to be fun when 2.5 Bears go in on Saturday, including Steve McMichael, who will be watching from his Homer Glen palatial estate. Glad you're with me today. The Bears in the win column, 21-17. They officially are calling it a final score. No PPD, rain and storms in Canton. They're not going to reconvene to finish the issue. The Bears offense looked terrific last night. There were so many people who were fearful of this looking like the final game of the preseason when nobody plays and they're getting ready to do final roster cuts. It wasn't that way. Both teams moved the ball very well. The Texans took a 7-0 lead as Davis Mills continues to sparkle in a Texans uniform. They're going to be really good this year. C.J. Stroud, of course, did not play, nor did Caleb Williams, nor did any of the big three. But in the process of Tyson Bagent time, and more impressively, Brett Rypien, the third quarterback on the Bears depth chart, looked terrific. And the offense was sparked by several big plays. They threw it well, and most of the time they caught it. Brett Rypien regrouped after a stumble and threw a beautiful pass to the 6'6" Colin Johnson, who's 28 years old, was on the Bears practice squad last year. He dropped it. Oh, no. Johnson dropped the ball that I immediately think he's cut. There's a guy who doesn't make the roster as a result because the Bears will take Dante Pettis, who's wearing 81 this year, as a fourth receiver. And it's going to be difficult for guys who drop passes that are thrown right to them in stride. A big play negated, and a nice job by Troy Aikman, who saw it live speed, how well that ball was thrown by Rypien. But he gets a guy to catch the ball again later in the game in the second half, or maybe it was late second quarter, forgive me, not in midseason form just yet, when Rypien threw a gorgeous pass to Johnson along the sideline, and he made about what is about an acrobatic catch as you could make. It was terrific. It was a highlight reel catch to redeem himself. He also caught a touchdown pass, as did Tommy Sweeney. Now, the Bears have a log jam at tight end. Wow, what an embarrassment of riches. They have Cole Kmet, and he's sealed up for the next 4 years, by the way. They also have the newcomer, Gerald Everett, who's an older player, more of the quintessential Y tight end who lines up right next to the tackle and can be valuable in run block. Same thing with Mercedes Lewis, the original Jaguar, who I think is in his 18th NFL season. The dude's 40. But Tommy Sweeney put his signature on that preseason game last night. It was fun to watch him make big plays as the Bears offense just went up and down the field. And Bagent was outshined by Rypien, but Bagent picked up where he left off last year after grinding his face off, as he told us on the podcast a couple weeks ago. Bagent was just as cool as he could be. He looks like he really has an understanding of the offense. He executes simple tosses with perfection. He is really fluid, and you have to like what you've seen from Tyson Bagent if you've been paying attention. But Brett Rypien was really good. They protected him all right. It was a clean game, and that was much to the relief of Buck and Aikman, who provided the call on ESPN. And there were some moments last night where I couldn't help but think, and I didn't go on social media, but I'm sure Bears fans were peppering Troy Aikman for comments he made about the volume of luck the Bears have had in this process of the quick reload of the roster. It is undeniable. Poles has been given the magic lamp by David Tepper, the Panthers owner. There's no question they've done several things since making that trade, flipping out of the number 1, talking about Chicago, flipping the 1 to the 9, 2 drafts ago when they selected Darnell Wright with eventually the 10th pick. They made that deal with Philadelphia so the Eagles could jump up and draft Jalen Carter the then considered troubled defensive tackle out of Georgia. He was second in the voting for Defensive Rookie of the Year last year. The only player who did better was Will Anderson, who the Texans took second right after they took Stroud. So much has to go right for the Bears ultimately to win that deal. It looks good, but stop calling it the Herschel Walker trade. The Cowboys won 3 out of 4 as a result of the Herschel Walker trade. They got draft picks who turned into Emmitt Smith, ultimately the game's all-time leading rusher, Darren Woodson, a 3-time first-team All-Pro safety who was a hammer, and Russell Maryland, the conscience, they called him at the U, because he was always telling his teammates to make sure they studied enough. He went to Whitney Young High School in Chicago. He was a terrific 3-technique D tackle. So that was a big part of why the Herschel Walker trade is the most significant in NFL history. And I heard the yappers and fans this year talking about being such a great trade already. You know what? Caleb Williams has yet to earn a varsity letter. Let's see if he is what we think he is. I believe in him. I think he does everything right. I think on and off the field, this is a guy for 22 who's coming in with an enormous amount of polish. And quite contrary to what everybody suggested or what some were suggesting last year. And in a game of rumors, they continue to swirl and get spun in different directions, that his father, Carl Williams, was a Marv Marinovich type. For those of you too young to remember Marv Marinovich, he was the father of Todd Marinovich, the USC prospect, who was taken late in the first round back in 91 by the Raiders, and he busted out because his father put too much pressure on him. That wasn't the case with Williams' dad. Carl Williams is a real estate developer in Washington, D.C., for those who don't know. And he also owns a gym, a high-performance athletic training facility for upscale athletes. And Caleb used the gym along with his high school teammates at a private preparatory school, Catholic prep school in D.C. So this is a guy who comes from means and comes from polish and exhibited that in his tenure both at Oklahoma and at USC because of the NIL money he made. And that was not out of USC's pocket, by the way. He left that in the budget for his university. He had maturity. He comes in here having managed business before. He is a corporation, and all of those things are great if he continues to sparkle on the field. He was terrific the year he won the Heisman Trophy in 22. He threw for 45 freaking touchdown passes. And Rome Odunze in his final year at Washington, which was the runner-up to Michigan for the national title last year, Odunze had 10 games with 100 yards or more receiving. He was a Biletnikoff finalist. Marvin Harrison Jr., who went 4th to the Cardinals, copped that award. But this is a great football player. Keenan Allen is a great slot player, and DJ Moore, part of that deal with Carolina when they flipped picks 2 years ago, had 1,364 receiving yards in his first year. He's got a good head start on Odunze to breaking Johnny Morris's all-time Bears receiving record of 5,059 yards. Yes, there is luck involved. Troy Aikman said there is luck involved in all of that. There is. A lot of stars had to fall in perfect alignment for the Bears to come back and get that number 1 pick this year to get Caleb Williams. The Carolina Panthers, after the deal, hired the wrong coach, Frank Reich. Anybody who watched the Colts fizzle in 21 understood what Frank Reich did, and he lost control of that team, and he believed in Carson Wentz more than Wentz's teammates did. That was a bad head coaching job. Tepper hired him anyway and then fires him after a 1-10 start. That's not a great way to go into a career for Bryce Young. Anybody who was writing the obit on Bryce Young right now after 1 year, that is a fool's exercise, and you may want to reconsider. Now, maybe Dave Canales and his staff don't turn him around. I think that's how the new head coach's name is pronounced. Maybe they're not the answer either. But I'll take my chances on a Pete Carroll mentee over what he was given with Reich. And that team was awful on defense as well. They had the fewest sacks in the league with only 11. Their turnover margin was the worst. It wasn't just on Young. That's not why the Panthers went 2-15, thus getting the Bears to the top of the draft. There is some luck involved in that, and luck is where hard work meets opportunity. I'm not saying Poles didn't exhibit a ton of skill, but I could just picture people rolling their eyes when Aikman said that last night. And look, he didn't mean it as an insult. And ask any athlete who's won a championship how much luck goes into it. It's a huge part of it. It's a huge part of how they fit in with their NFL teams when they're drafted or signed as an undrafted free agent. Johnny on the spot, right opportunity for a guy with the right skill set in a specific defense. There is a ton of luck that's involved with winning a championship. That's not a fault of Ryan Poles that that he's had some of that along the way. Consider it a compliment that he has been as good as he has been. The offensive line remains a huge question mark for the Bears as they go to Buffalo next week and Williams gets his first action. The staff has said, Matt Eberflus, that he wants Williams to get 40 to 50 preseason snaps this year. I assume 25 will come against the Bills this coming Saturday or next Saturday in Orchard Park. And looking forward to that, looking forward to seeing what will become of Nate Davis. They haven't been able to rely on him. Waiting to see if Braxton Jones, who has had a terrific first year out of Southern Utah, a 5th-round pick, slid back a little bit last year, and he missed 6 games along the way. Wright is a solid guy on the right side. The center position is going to be an in-camp, in-preseason games battle between Ryan Bates, the guy they traded for, the veteran from the Bills who plays both center and guard, and the cat from the Rams, whose name is escaping me right now. I don't look at my notes. This is all from memory, kids, because I live for what the Bears are doing and what they have done. I bear witness to all of this stuff, I promise you, and I do it with enthusiasm that is authentic, and it was so great to see football back last night. I treated it like it was the opening weekend of the season, and I had the benefit of an empty home. My wife off on business in Michigan for a couple days gave me a chance not only to smoke in the kitchen, but eat some things I otherwise wouldn't have. I treated myself to a nice Italian food pregame meal. I even opened one of her nice bottles of Napa Cab to have some wine with my pasta. It was outstanding, and enjoyed the pregame show. Enjoyed all of it. And boy, was Joe Buck happy that there was a good first half. He seemed like he was so worried. He didn't want to have to go Al Michaels in the first quarter of a preseason game where the starters weren't included. But Davis Mills did well for the Texans, and so did Case Keenum. One of the best budget bargain basement buys in the NFL in the last 20 years, when the Minnesota Vikings got him for $2 million just to guide the ship in 2017. $2 million, while the Bears spent something like $18 million total on Mike Glennon because they didn't think Trubisky was ready in 17, and he wasn't. They won a game in week 6 asking Trubisky to throw all of 7 passes. That's true. He completed 4 of them, though. Had a great quarterback rating that day. More than 100 was his rating. Their second win of the year at 17 because they never took the training wheels off. Case Keenum made $2 million and didn't turn it over. He didn't fumble the ball. He didn't throw interceptions. And the Vikings got to the NFC Championship game. And it started well for Minnesota in that title game. They drew first blood, touchdown pass from Keenum to the tight end, Kyle Rudolph. But Nick Foles settled down and took the Eagles to the Super Bowl and won a Super Bowl MVP. And later came to the Bears to save them. Yeah, that didn't go well either. But I think Caleb Williams is the man. I hope he gets through the preseason without any hitches health-wise. The Bears are okay there right now. They haven't had any serious injuries, and we don't know if it's an injury or personal issues that's precluding Davis Nate Davis, the guard, from participating on a regular basis. And Tevin Jenkins is a guy who they like. A pace find a few years ago before he was whacked, but he's not you haven't been able to rely on it. I'm pretty sure that was in Pace's last draft class. Gridiron Assassin will correct me if it's an E1 if you're scoring at home. And yes, I am considering getting back in the fantasy football league, but it was good to have football back. And I'm looking very much forward to the Hall of Fame enshrinement ceremony tomorrow at noon Chicago time. Steve McMichael has been a buddy for a long time, and I will report to you next week on what it was like to be at his home in Homer Glen and spend a little time with Mongo today, this Friday. As we go into his enshrinement weekend, it will be a zoo at Steve's house on Saturday. I was invited, and it's going to be television cameras, and it's going to be broadcast, and it will be a circus. Keith Van Horn and I, former Bears tackle, wanted to avoid that, so we're going out there today when we have a little bit more time to spend with Steve, who has not been able to make speech for well more than a year, probably closer to 2. He hasn't used his arms. He hasn't eaten, or, it's a lot of people don't know what ALS is. The brain doesn't have the ability. The nerves aren't carrying signals to the muscles. The body atrophies and you lose everything but your eyes. And it can be prolonged. It can go on for a long, long time. And Mongo has wanted to see this day. That was something he initially didn't want, but he was convinced by wife Misty, who was my guest earlier this week on the podcast, to keep grinding. And his teammates encouraged him to keep grinding, to learn the system where you can communicate by writing a series of words by eye movement. When your eyes meet a letter on a gigantic screen, it affixes that letter, and then you move on to the next letter to communicate what it is you need. Like Jarrett Payton being his choice to make the presentation for Canton, which they now record with the Hall of Fame, asking each presenter 5 questions, and encourages the recipients to not spend more than 2 or 3 minutes tops on each topic, and then they edit what they want. It's better this way, but it seems much less personal. And in these cases, with Steve, I think it's probably a good idea to do it that, as it is for all of them, because guys will talk forever about their buddies. And if you're not a fan of the Eagles a few years ago, you really don't care what Tommy McDonald's teammates thought of his work habits and his party habits. He played in the 40s or 50s. Goes back a few years. Dwight Freeney is going in to the Hall of Fame tomorrow. Andre Johnson, the first Houston Texan to be enshrined, and he was a gigantic receiver. One of the guys on the ESPN set called him the first big receiver. The Texans born at the beginning of this millennium, 01 or 02. I don't agree with that. Herman Moore was a gigantic man in the mid-90s for the Lions, and when you think the Lions in the 90s, you think Barry Sanders, the mercurial water bug out of Oklahoma State, but they had 3 very good receivers. Moore, who was about 6'5", maybe 6'4", also had Brett Perriman and Johnny Morton. All 3 of those guys whose careers intersected got enough receiving yards with the Lions to have more than Johnny Morris had with the Bears. DJ Moore, Rome Odunze, the world is yours. Go get it. Go and get Johnny Morris. The 1,364-yard head start for Moore is so significant because the number's so low. I don't think Odunze can catch him with that big of a start. It's a 4-year job. You can do that. You can break that record in 4 years. That's 3 more for Moore, who recently was rewarded with the richest contract extension in Bears history, $110 million to extend him, which means Caleb Williams on his first contract, $39.5 million total, has four guys who are going to be with him for 4 years. He's got Odunze for at least 4, DJ Moore for 4, Cole Kmet, I mentioned a little while ago, And also Darnell Wright, the right tackle, is signed for 4 more years. So it's an embarrassment of riches for the Bears. Bring us to Buffalo to see that second game of the regular season. And I have to say this, as much as I have enjoyed the enthusiasm, a much needed change of pace in Chicago sports talk, it sure beats talking or hearing about the White Sox as they try to avoid becoming the losingest team in baseball history. That doesn't do it for me. What's wrong with the Cubs hasn't done it for me. I'm a football guy, but I'm almost ready to take a break from that after hearing the Open to Bears radio last night en route to getting my pasta. Jeff Joniak selling the product beyond what even he has to. When the canned Open, the pre-produced Open, as opposed to the post-produced Open, for Bears radio last night, which was a 2-hour pregame show almost. Mark Silverman and Tom Waddle anchoring it down at 190 North State Street. Joniak says Ryan Pace eats pressure for breakfast. Oh my goodness, that statement is ridiculous, just like Devin Hester was. I want to thank you for listening to preseason football edition of the Danny Mac podcast. Lots more coming in the days ahead. We're hoping to have a conversation with Devin Hester very soon for you, and some of those who might have been in Canton, who were in Canton over these few days to see these enshrinements. And I'll report to you next week on what it was like to be at Mongo's house and share a few thoughts with Steve. I am going to say congratulations and goodbye to a guy I've admired and enjoyed for a long, long time. Adam Delavid is the guy who runs the show at BetRivers. His nickname is Baby Capone. Adam never dropped a ball like Colin Johnson did. He caught them all. Sam Michael is my executive producer, and I thank Randy Merkin, Troy Mocker, and Alex Pastor for everything they do for the podcast as well. Have a great weekend. Enjoy the Hall of Fame ceremonies. Lots more football around the corner as the preseason continues as we inch our way to the opener against the Tennessee Titans on the 8th of September at Soldier Field. I'm Danny Mac. Have a great weekend.